Hi there. By popular request, we're going to do a few more live presentations and I'm trying to keep them short so they're interesting and also not too much work for me to put together. And I just wanted to say hello really quickly. I'm going to turn off the camera here in a second so this whole thing will record more quickly. But today we're going to talk about leadership styles. And this is kind of a textbook subject for a standard intro to business course, and we're going to think about how we can apply this topic to the horticultural industries. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you think about yourself a little bit and how it may apply to bosses you've had, or if you are a boss, which style of leadership you naturally tend to gravitate toward, and which ones you may want to work on developing. Okay, so for most of you, you're going to be working on developing sole proprietorships, and the easiest business is one that does not have any employees. It's just you working on whatever it is you're doing, self-employed. But as a business grows, and even in the planning stages, you may plan to have a business that requires hiring employees, because when you have people, you can get more done. So depending on the business, you may need it from the outset, or it may be the kind of thing you want to do over time. And it is true that finding, hiring, and training employees can be one of your biggest expenses. So if you do it really well, it can pay off for you. And if you do it poorly, it can cost you a lot of money to continuously be searching for new employees and then discovering that they don't work out and then repeating the process. So we want to avoid those problems. And if you invest in the well-being of your employees, it'll save you time, it'll save you money, and definitely can save you a headache in the long run. It is important to recognize that having a job, of course, it is about getting the money and trading your time or your effort for the money of the company. But it also is important for a number of reasons, and they are kind of psychological reasons. And so I like to introduce Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. You may hear about this in other courses, and if it's the first time you've heard about it, I think it might be an interesting thing to explore. Now, typically, people say they work for the money, but research suggests that as long as a person makes enough money, once they make enough to, pay for all of their needs, then really what they're doing at work is gaining certain satisfaction. And this is really when you think about how people talk about their job or how they think about their job or decide whether or not to work someplace or not. Oftentimes, giving somebody a raise with money is not going to necessarily keep someone around. And even though people may think that they work for the money, they work to make money, but then once that's covered, they think of all these other things when it comes to working at a company. And so we can kind of take a look at this triangle here as one way to think about what people need in general. So of course this is oversimplified, and this is an old psychological model, and many people in the fields of psychology have added to it, and there's discussion and debate about how accurate it is. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting to look at. So the idea with this triangle or this pyramid is that you need to satisfy the thing on the bottom before you can move up to the next thing above it. And what Maslow, the psychologist who developed this, was saying is that a human has many different types of needs, and in order for that person to be completely fulfilled, and he used the term self-actualized, in order for a person to have fulfillment, they have to meet all of these different types of needs. And there are basic needs you can see on the bottom, psychological needs that you can see in the middle, and then that top of that pyramid, that's kind of like the goal, the self-fulfillment needs or self-actualization. The idea is we need to ensure that people have met each of these needs before they can move up to the next need. And it's not saying that one's more important than the other, but what this is saying is that some types of needs come first. So if you look at the basic needs, for instance, the bottom of the pyramid, the physiological needs, food, water, sleep, warmth, those are the most important things. Yes, a person needs safety and security, but if somebody does not have food or water, they will sacrifice the safety and security in order to get the food and water. So food and water comes first. Once you have your basic needs met, your physiological needs, and you have your security and your safety, then we can look to developing some of our other types of needs. And the next one on the pyramid is belongingness and love. So, from a workplace scenario, we're not necessarily saying it's the boss's job to provide all of these things for people. And we're not necessarily saying that an employee needs to get all of these things in a workplace, but it's important to think about and be aware of. So connection, friends, community, that is something that people need. And you're only able to meet those needs when you've met your basic needs. The next level up, still part of the psychological needs, is esteem. And this is the prestige and the feeling of accomplishment. Now, typically, when people think about whether or not they like their job, they're actually thinking about that sort of a thing. And there may be all sorts of other things that the job brings them. It might help them buy the food or pay for a house that gives them safety and security. But ultimately, whether or not an employee sticks around usually has to do with either the community, the people at the workplace, or the sense of accomplishment that they get from doing a job well done. Now that top triangle, self-fulfillment, that's something that is up to each person to kind of figure out for themselves. So the workplace doesn't necessarily need to think about giving that to a person, an employee, but if we can help people to meet their basic and psychological needs, then they will be able to go on and have their own fulfilling situation. Now, as an owner or a manager of a business, it'll be important for you to develop your own unique way that you deal with employees. And everybody has something that comes natural to them, and how you like to communicate, how you relate to people, whether you want to be friendly, whether you like to tell jokes, whether you like to be serious. All of these sorts of things that are part of your personality, they can kind of come together and form a leadership style. And so when we talk about leadership styles, what we're going to introduce is an old concept. You can see here it originates in the 1930s, and there have been some developments which I'll explain. But ultimately, this is kind of like your personality, and if you are in charge, or at least in charge of other employees at a workplace, how do you try to get things done? And what is your style? Let's take a look at the three major styles of leadership that were developed in the 1930s by Kurt Lewin. So our first style here is Autocratic. Now, Autocratic leaders are leaders who are kind of the command and control style. They like to just make decisions without talking to their team members, even sometimes if the input would be useful. These are leaders who like to make decisions on their own. Typically, they make decisions quickly and are not necessarily seeking agreement on decisions. And it can be valuable when you need to make quick decisions, when there's no time to have a discussion about things. And not every single decision needs to be a group decision. Some things are not necessarily worthy of having everybody discuss. But ultimately, this style, if it's extreme, it can be demoralizing for the employee, and then typically will lead to the employees having a high level of turnover because they don't feel like they're really useful. They're just kind of like a puppet on a string, or they're doing what they're told. Some people really value autocratic leaders and people who just kind of take charge and are confident in their decisions. They see discussion as kind of a form of weakness or somebody being unsure of themselves. And other people find autocratic leaders to be really difficult to work with. And now next up, we have democratic. And I don't really like the term democratic, although that's what was originally proposed as part of the three leadership styles. And the reason I don't like it is because in the United States, we tend to think, oh, democratic is good. That's a democracy. That's the kind of government we like. So the goal should be to be democratic. But it's not necessarily the case that this second one is better than the first one. Or it's not even the case that they're totally separate. Typically, you'll have traits that are democratic and traits that are autocratic. But in general, democratic leaders, while they still make the final decisions, they will include the team members in the decision-making process. And the benefit of this is usually it will encourage creativity among your team, and then people can typically feel more engaged and get more motivated to participate and really take some ownership in what's going on. But then the flip side, of course, you may not be able to make decisions quickly, or you may have a lot of dissent or differing opinions, and at the end of the day, something needs to happen, and you may end up making more people unhappy than people happy by including them in certain decisions. And so knowing when is the right time to engage with people and work together, that's an important skill when it comes to having employees. And the democratic leader will tend to prioritize discussion and shared decision making. And the last of the three leadership styles that was originally proposed is called Laissez-Faire. It's a French term and basically just means hands off. So a laissez-faire leader is the type of person who just gives their team members a lot of freedom in how they do their work and how they set their own deadlines. And they can be quite extreme as well. There's typically a connotation with the term laissez-faire that it's kind of like sitting back and just putting your feet up and letting everybody else do the work. So a good laissez-faire leader will provide support, resources, and advice if it's needed, but otherwise they don't get involved. And this kind of freedom can actually lead to a really high job satisfaction. Some people can really like it. They thrive being allowed to make decisions on their own. But if certain team members don't manage their time well, or if they don't have the knowledge they need, the training wasn't proper and the skills may be lacking. And then some people even, the self-motivation is not necessarily something that they value as much as others, and they might need a little bit more hands-on attention from their boss or their supervisor. So the downside is that it can work for some, but not for others. And if it's too extreme, then it just kind of looks like the boss is sitting around with their feet up. Now, all three of these can be taken to unhealthy extremes, but you can probably see that there are situations in which all three styles are appropriate. So when we actually think about these three styles, and for yourself, you're trying to wonder, oh, am I autocratic, am I democratic, or am I laissez-faire? Well, the answer is you are a little bit of all three. And these are kind of a spectrum. Now, if we arrange these in a triangle, you would fall somewhere within the 3 points. And you may be closer to one corner than the other, or you might be right in the middle. But the question is not which one are you, it's how much of each one are you. And so we are typically better off displaying this as kind of a Venn diagram where the circles overlap, and you can recognize that you might have elements of one, two, or all three of these different leadership styles. And you can also develop or choose to employ leadership styles that you may not feel like come naturally to you, but you can recognize maybe a deficiency in one area, or with a difficult situation, you may try to employ a different tactic. And as often the case with the Venn diagram, it's that sweet spot right in the middle where all three come together. And that's what originally with our three styles, that center point in the Venn diagram where somebody has all three in good balance, that was considered to be perfect leadership. So that was almost 100 years ago, and there's surely been a lot of people thinking and learning about business since then. And there have been many different leadership styles that have been added to that list of three. And we'll go over a few of them here just because I think they're interesting and they help us to understand that there's nuances and there's different ways. And these are not the only other three, but just think about these and how they compare to the first three, and then also how they may be different. And you may recognize areas where there are even more types of being, because in reality, for each person, there is going to be somewhat of a unique way of getting through. So this first style that I'll introduce, in addition to our classic three, it can be called paternalist, kind of like a parent. So the paternalist leader is a boss who tends to show concern for their employees, for their workers, and kind of act like a role model or like a parent. And what they usually do is they give a lot of care and try to take care of their people, especially if it's like one department versus another. And in return, typically, they receive a lot of trust and a lot of loyalty because employees really do like when they get a sense that their boss is looking out for them and taking care of them. There's good things about this. It's that workers can, tend to become really committed to the project. But the downside sometimes is that when workers do want to go off and work independently, that may or may not work well with a paternalist leader or a supervisor who has this kind of tendency. But it is good because workers tend to overall develop better organization skills and tend to have a little bit better goals and goals of the company in mind, because usually the boss tends to reinforce good work and have a little bit more of a presence and reinforce with the employee what it is they're doing and why they are there. One downside that has been identified with this style is that the leader can start to play favorites when it comes to decision making. So some employees, the ones who, perform really well or especially take a good they take a good liking to the boss, and they really show that trust and loyalty, and they act like they're really committed to making the boss happy. Well, the boss is going to start looking at them as more valuable employees, as opposed to someone else who wants to just show up and do their job and do it perfectly well, but not necessarily get really involved. The paternalist leader tends to, over time, dismiss those employees, and it's something that they need to watch out for. The next one on this list is transactional, and a transactional leader is someone who focuses on motivating their people through rewards and punishments. And this can take all sorts of different forms, but you can imagine somebody who, gives out a gift card to Starbucks if you participate in a discussion, or on the punishment side, if you do something wrong, the boss is right there telling you, oh, that was wrong, you shouldn't do that again. And there may even be kind of a point system, and at the end of the month or end of the quarter, whoever has the most points gets a little prize, some sort of recognition. That's all part of a transactional strategy of leadership. So in this case, the leader tends to intervene only when the workers are not doing something right. And when they aren't, the leader will tend to try to do the right thing, so correct the actions and improve the performance. And this can be negative when there is a lot of creativity or kind of emotion involved in the job, because it's sometimes hard to judge whether or not somebody is putting in effort or whether or not someone is even doing the right thing. Like if it's in choosing the color on some kind of a report, that's something that is harder to judge as positive or negative, so may not fit in with a reward system. And if the emotional level of the work is low, like it's pretty straightforward, you just get the pot and put the plant in the pot as you're propagating, well, then in that case, it's straightforward, and this transactional approach tends to work really well. In fact, farm workers often employ a transactional approach, and legally they're even exempt from minimum wage. And usually the way that works best for farm workers is that they are paid per plant harvested or per plant put in the ground. And so it lets those who want to work faster, lets them make more money, and it lets the others who may not be able to work as fast earn less money. But as long as everybody's still making a minimum wage, then it's not unethical. In fact, many farm workers can earn up to 3 times the minimum wage while they're in the field. And typically the boss is happy to do that, because the more work that gets done, the more money they make. So it doesn't matter about an hourly wage, it's more about every unit that is produced tends to bring me this much value. And so a transactional approach can actually give a lot of incentive, but it's more for like a factory type model. And the last one we'll introduce here is the transformational leader. And this is a person who, when they're the boss, they tend to see things in terms of change. So they want to make a positive change. And that change can take place in a number of ways. They can see the ultimate goal of the company to be the change they're trying to make. And they may also see their employees needing to improve their performance or somehow step up to working at a higher level, or even if it's kind of working up those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But the transformational approach takes a look at change over time. And this type of a leader tends to be very communicative, and they talk about a vision, or they talk about the future, and they put a lot of effort into trying to inspire their workers and giving a sense of purpose and really get people excited and enthusiastic about what they're doing. And this takes a special person. Not everybody naturally has this talent, although everything can be developed. But typically people who excel at the transformational leadership style, they have a high energy level, and they tend to be really good at self-promotion, or maybe not even intentionally, but they have a personality that just is self-promoting. So at the end of a conversation, people tend to feel good when they're talking to these transformational leaders. It's like that kind of person that's out there that just kind of pumps you up a little bit. And another thing that's unique to these people is that they're typically willing to take a risk and try to use different strategies, kind of irregular approaches, or maybe thinking outside the box. And when the employees see the boss doing this, the employees tend to be inspired and really admire a transformational leader. So there's a lot of positivity and a lot of enthusiasm typically with this style. Now the downside is that a lot of people try really hard to be transformational leaders, and if it's not genuine, or if the person is not skilled enough or practiced enough, and if they're not sincere, then the employees can see right through it, and it takes the form of kind of like the corporate culture and sort of like a false kind of enthusiasm that is almost like a cheerleading and maybe seen as kind of silly or not worth getting worked up over. So all of these have their pros and their cons. They have their right place, and they have their extremes to which they would become inappropriate. So what we've done here as our final slide is taken all of these styles, our 3 original styles, and then the 3 newer styles that have been kind of added onto this list. And here we have a little flow chart that can kind of help you to decide what type of leader you may be naturally, but also it may help you decide what type of leader to choose to be in different situations. And more importantly, when it comes to building a team, it may help you try to look for a person to fill in a gap, because sometimes you have a benefit when you have people who think different ways and value different things. You have the people who will tend to step up, and you'll have the people who appreciate somebody else stepping up and just doing the standard work. You have people who want to have discussions and decisions, and then you have other people who may see the time when it's not a good idea to even have a discussion, but just do the job and get the work done. And a well-rounded team will kind of have many of these traits. So let's take a look at this flow chart. The first thing to do is look at that middle circle with white. And these are all kind of quotes. So the question is, does this quote speak to you? Does it make sense for you or for the situation you're thinking about? So the first quote is, "What I say goes, no questions asked." And do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that a boss should be that way, or that a leader should have that approach? So let's, for the sake of simplicity, let's stay to the left and say, okay, yes, that makes sense. That sounds good. What I say goes, no questions asked. That's how a boss should be. And you follow that line. It says, my team counts on me to act quickly and decisively. There's no need or time to gather everyone's opinions or discuss with the whole group. You can see now there's another yes or no. If you agree with that second statement, then that takes you down to the autocratic leader. And that's a good leader is confident and decisive, When it's crunch time, my team depends on me to act and make good choices. That's kind of the autocratic approach. But now let's go back up and say no to that second question. My team counts on me to act quickly. There's no need or time to get everyone's opinion. And if the answer is no, notice that puts us in the democratic, where I may make the final decision, but I include the rest of the team in the decision-making process. Their perspective is important. So even though whatever you say is what goes, no questions asked, along the way, a democratic leader will get input and at least have everyone's perspective heard. Now, if we go back to the very top and say, you know what, that approach is just wrong for a situation or for a certain company, it should never be what I say goes, no questions asked. That puts us on the other side. And notice there's 3 options with how you would disagree with that statement. The first one says, the best teams consist of strong individuals. My number 1 priority is to encourage and develop individual growth and a healthy team dynamic. Only then will the project be successful. And as you see, you follow that line, and that is the paternalist approach. So being a team leader is first and foremost an opportunity to encourage individual growth, development in every member of my team. Notice none of these are right or wrong. They're just different ways of looking at certain situations. But the paternalist would say, no, it's not about what I say goes. It's about each of my team members and me helping them to develop. Another way to think of this is that this project is a chance to accomplish something great. Being a team leader is first and foremost an important opportunity to inspire new attitudes and lead by example. And then that's along the lines of that positive transformational approach. So this project is an opportunity to demonstrate our abilities. I have big changes in mind for how we can do things as a company, and it all starts here. Now, a third way of disagreeing with our first question there, what I say goes, no questions asked, you disagree, you may say, you know what, my team is made up of intelligent, capable adults. They don't need me to encourage, teach, or babysit them. There's no hand-holding around here. And that last line kind of gives you the clue that that's the laissez-faire attitude, which means I can be pretty hands-off. My team will let me know when they need my help. And that's not necessarily good or bad. Sometimes that's the right approach. Another way of having this same hands-off approach is actually the transactional leadership style. And this is where my team knows exactly what's expected of them and what they signed up for. And if they're not pulling their weight, I'll be the first to let them know. So notice the transactional leader also stays on the sidelines, lets the people do their job and make their own decisions, but does step in more quickly than the laissez-faire. The laissez-faire is kind of like hands-off, let people work their own problems out. The transactional is hands-off, but once there's a problem, they will step in and tell the person what's right and what's not right. So there you go. You can kind of guide your way through all 6 of these different styles and think about how they apply to you. Think about how they apply to the bosses you've had in different jobs that you may have held. And as we're building our business plan, think about how this may apply to your approach to hiring employees in the plan and even in the actual action of implementing any kind of a business in the future. I hope you find this rewarding and interesting.